So I left KROY in '78, went to Chicago for 2 years, and then came back and did KROY FM.
Okay.
And
Was it KROY?
It was KROI.
Yeah.
I-97.
I-97. Eventually, did it become Y-97?
Yes, it became
okay.
Y-97
Yeah.
after that. Adult rock.
Yeah, that's right. But I-97 was more of a top 40, or what was it?
Well, yeah. For a while there was KROY AM and KROI FM.
Right.
And
it was
they were
called
both
double-barreled KROY when it
Yeah,
started.
right. Double-barreled KROY. Exactly. You know, so for a while there, it was interesting in the KROY studios because you had the former air staff of KROY AM now down the hall on KROI FM, and then KROY AM was hiring all new talent, and the ratings were starting to plummet because people were. I mean, you could hear when you were on the air, when you were on AM radio station back in '79 during this transition to FM, you could actually hear a vacuum of people tuning out. When you're on the air, you could hear, God, people aren't listening anymore.
Phones stopped lighting
Phones
up.
stopped lighting up, you know, it was really,
So you
really
did the
interesting.
morning show, didn't you?
Yeah, I ended up doing mornings.
Yeah.
Cox on the radio in the mornings. We had features like Cox in the Dark, where I would ask a stupid question that I didn't know the answer to.
Right.
Like if a semi-truck's not a full truck, what is a full truck? Or if helium's lighter than air, where do they get it? You know, and I would allow listeners to call it and get me out of the dark, and the one with the best answer I would give an award to. And then back then, we were just getting into wireless broadcasts, where we could take the remote unit out and actually broadcast from the unit, direct, on a Marty system. So I would, every Monday and Friday, I would do my morning show from a different location somewhere in Sacramento. And I would call it Cox on the Corner. And we had the Honk Show. You could come down to my remote, wherever I happened to be that day, and perform. You could tell a joke, you could sing a song. We had a guy jump trampoline and drag. I never quite understood that. But you could do that if you could actually do it for 20 seconds, whatever it was, for 20 seconds without a motorist honking at you, you would win a prize. So
how much control did you have over your show?
I had full control. Maybe a little too much control. And things weren't so politically correct then either. So
Right.
you know, I would
Get
make,
away with a lot more.
Yeah, I think so. And you know, nowadays there's all this shock radio where people maybe seem to be a little more intense, but I don't think they are, because they're just blatant. They use foul language and talk about sexually explicit material,
Howard
which is a
Stern
cheap
show.
way to get. I mean, I don't know. Back then, I think I had more controversial content and did it without foul language and nudity.
Right.
And but nowadays, people's attention spans are so short that they can't follow content. If you don't have a setup and a punchline delivery in 12 seconds, they lose it. They can't follow you. So the whole way of communication has changed.
Right. Now, back then, were you conscious of audience behavior, how they listened to your show, or did that even matter? Was it about just going in and having fun, or did you have a scientific perception of what was going on, the communication process?
That's a good question. I think that it was all pretty much intuitive, gut level stuff. You know, painting, you know, radio is much more visual than television. And painting pictures was really what I was all about. If I could say words that would make you think visually, then it worked. And by visual, I mean, if I were to go on the air and report something on radio, let's just say that we covered Folsom Lake being drained of water and filled with hot, bubbly chocolate, and then a bomber dropping marshmallows into that lake. Well, on radio, everybody who heard that would be at a different point of view. Some people would be on the shoreline looking at this event. Some people would be out in a boat floating on the chocolate. Some people would envision themselves floating on a marshmallow or swimming out to it or in the airplane. If you had 1,000 people hearing that broadcast on radio, you'd have 1,000 different mental images of that event. If the same event were covered by television, you'd have one point of view.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by radio being much more visual than television.
It's more theater of the mind.
Yes, it is. But even so is blatant visual. It's all still theater of the mind. Because you're looking at a flat screen set. A A television camera is nothing more than a flashlight in a totally dark room. And wherever you show that flashlight, it's the only thing you're going to see. So if you want to see more than one or two scenes, you got to turn the flashlight. Here you can't see it all. The radio is pretty much all encompassing. However, the visuals still end up as theater of the mind because you have to fill in what isn't on the screen. So it's the same thing.
So in those days, this seems to me it might have been before the consultants took over.
Yeah, oh,
because you had
absolutely.
so much autonomy. Was there ever a point where they pulled you in and did you have a consultant? And
We had a consultant named John Rook, and
Okay.
at the time there were only maybe 5 consultants in the country.
okay,
And the consultants back then dealt more directly with talent than they do now.
okay,
Because we actually had content. We could actually go on the air then and say things. Nowadays you can't. Now people just want time, temperature, weather, sports, traffic, and what the hell was the name of that song? That's
Right.
all they want.
I don't want you to offend the sponsors.
No, exactly. You know, unless you're a morning show, that's
Yeah.
what all the content is. And then you have occasional stuff like Don and Mike and Brian and what's his name, Mark and Brian, who don't play music and they just
All
you know,
interviews.
yeah, it's all interviews or bits or things. The great thing about when I was a jock back then is, God, if I came in feeling one way, I'd do my show that way.
Okay.
If there was an event that happened just that morning, then that would be my show. Now they produce their tomorrow's show last week or
Yeah.
yesterday, and no matter what event happens, it's still that show that they have planned. So it isn't as spontaneous, and it's sad because radio is really one of the only mediums that is constantly live and can go almost anywhere. With television, you need a remote crew, and you need a camera guy, you need a sound guy, you need talent, and by the time they get all that set up, the event may be over. With radio, you can just run up with a microphone and cover it spontaneously the way it is. So it's too bad that radio now is all, even though it's live, is mostly pre-produced content.
Automated, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, back then, did they even have a way to automate?
Automation's
For the
been
whole
around. Automation's been around as long as radio has
Okay.
been around. Back then, the automation systems were
Big
huge.
reels.
You know, Zyklon 2000 machines,
Okay.
and you had to have an engineer there or an operator loading tapes with metal sensors so it would cue the next event, and all the commercials were on different tapes, and the music was on a big 10-inch reel that had to be threaded up every hour and a half. And
So really,
High
because you needed an
maintenance.
operator, it's not like today's automation where you don't need anybody.
today's automation is, I still have a lot of friends in radio, and a lot of them unfortunately are doing their shows on the automation system. And the biggest complaint from listeners is they don't notice any difference except when they try to call and request a song because
Nobody's
there's absolutely
there.
no one there. The most eeriest sight, Alex, was a few months ago when I was in one of the major corporation facilities here where they had 6 stations. This was in the evening. 6 control rooms.
Okay.
Beautifully designed, multi-million-dollar layout, the best equipment, beautiful microphones, and it was eerie because coming out of each one of these control rooms was a broadcast that sounded live, and you walk down the hall and look in the windows, and there was nobody in there. Here's all this equipment sitting there, and it sounded like, hey, it's 3:25, and I'm playing more music for you, and you look in there, and it's empty, and it's really strange.
Yeah.
I have a buddy of mine who does the all-night show at one of the stations here, and he goes in every evening at 7 o'clock for a half hour and records an entire 6-hour show, which the computer digitizes. He sits down at a console, puts on his headphones, he's got his whole show on the log in front of him, and he pushes sequence 1, he hears the last 15 seconds of the song that will play at midnight. And then a red light comes on and he talks, and then he hits the next sequence and here's the first 15 seconds of the song he's going to play next. And the computer stores all his voiceover tracks and then assembles that live from midnight to 6, and it sounds like he's there. You can't tell.